Cool. So we're going to finish up by talking about sexual tension. And especially after that little dance party. There's a lot of sexual tension in this room right now. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to use two colors for this one. And research for attraction, scientists have found that basically, and this goes for men and women, traits that we find attractive in people, they're either traits that are very similar to our own or very different than our own. And it depends on the trait, and it also depends on the attraction. So let's say this is similar. Different. So different traits tends to be more about personality traits, and the similar traits that are attractive are lifestyle and values. So we tend to be attracted and have a lot of chemistry with women who have opposite personality traits as our own. So for instance, if we're very introverted, we tend to end up with extroverted women. If we're very organized and like a little bit compulsive, we end up with women who are very laid back and relaxed. This is just on average. It isn't a rule, but we tend to be attracted to personality traits that complement and compensate for our own. Whereas things that we find attractive are similar lifestyles and similar values. So if we're really into surfing and going to the beach, we're going to be more interested in girls who are interested in surfing and going to the beach. If we got our PhD in biology, we're going to be more interested in women who got their PhD, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, these are guidelines, these are not rules. You know, sometimes these two things come into conflict. So for instance, if we're like really kind of an uptight guy who had a PhD in biology, and we're really, really attracted to kind of wild, spontaneous, unpredictable women, that might end up being a woman who likes to go surfing every day and party at the beach. So, but these things are just as a general rule are what go along with one another. Now, differences create unpredictability, spontaneity, predictability, and cohesion. And what ends up happening is that over here, leads to sexual arousal, and this leads to intimacy. Sexual arousal, getting turned on, is created through unpredictability and spontaneity. That's why I said earlier that bold behaviors, bold sexual behaviors, are the biggest things that arouse women. Predictability and cohesion lead to intimacy. Now, depending on the relationship you want, you have to have, you always have to have both of these to have a relationship, but you want to have some sort of balance between them. So for instance, for the guys here who always end up in the friend zone, what do? You're always predictable, you're always agreeable, you always have everything in common. So you end up with a lot of intimacy, but little arousal. Because you're too predictable. Everything's obvious, everything's safe, everything's cohesive. And then you got like the crazy bad boy, narcissist type. It's always unpredictable, always unstable, always spontaneous. Creates a lot of sexual arousal. That makes sense? This is why also couples, as they've been together for longer periods of time, lose sexual arousal for each other. Things become too predictable. There's no spontaneity left. They've had sex so many hundreds of times that there's nothing unique or different or exciting about it. This is why couples who want to reignite their relationship, add a spark back into their relationship, they try to do crazy things. Maybe they add something in the bedroom, or like role play, or buy toys, or take a romantic vacation to Fiji, or whatever it is. And if you want to get really nerdy about it, arousal is stimulated through the dopamine system. Intimacy is stimulated through the oxytocin system. And for those of you who have read familiar with the alpha-beta model, this is the beta side, this is the alpha side. Being alpha is always described as being dominant, being spontaneous, being bold, being unpredictable, being mysterious, because it gets you laid. And it does. It stimulates sexual arousal. Being beta is always described as being too agreeable, too cohesive, too predictable. It generates intimacy. Now, the thing is that these two things are not mutually exclusive. You can have both of them at once. You can have one of them at a time. Or you can have neither of them at a time. And narcissists generally come extremely high on this side because they're willing to do whatever they want, say whatever they want. And in codependence, usually gravitate towards this side. They're too agreeable. They've no, they're not self-directed. Now, when you think about flirting, what is flirting? Give me some examples of flirting.
Smiles and eye contact.
Eye contact, smiling, jokes, humor, touching, compliments, teasing, joking around, bantering. It's most of it. And you can see how those things fit in here. The reason teasing works, if you look at men's dating advice, generally what's taught first is teasing. The reason it's taught is because teasing creates unpredictability. It creates doubt, which creates sexual arousal, creates sexual tension. Being bold and being physical also creates doubt. Yesterday I told you the story about the girl at the Boston Harbor. And I told her, I said, I want to have sex with you tonight. Now, why is that sexually arousing? Because it's unpredictable, it's spontaneous. It's not cohesive. I'm asserting my desire, and she has no idea what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it or how it's going to happen. It's interesting when they've studied both male and female sexual arousal. As you can imagine, male sexual arousal is pretty straightforward. They didn't have to study that one much. Female sexual arousal is much more complicated. In fact, they still don't have like a conclusive model for how it interacts. My favorite study that I read about female sexual arousal is they did this experiment where they took like 50 men and 50 women, and they put them in a chair, and they attached like electrodes to their genitals to monitor blood flow, or attach something, whatever, to monitor blood flow to the genitals, which measures arousal. And then they had the men and women watch a variety of videos, video clips. And one was like, I think one was just like an innocuous video clip, like just a random landscape or something like that, which was like the control. One was heterosexual porn. One was gay porn. One was lesbian porn. And then one was monkey porn. And the men were very predictable. If they were heterosexual, they became aroused at the heterosexual porn and the lesbian porn, and not aroused on anything else. If they were gay, they became aroused for the gay porn and nothing else. And part of the experiment is they told the people to write down how, on a scale from 1 to 10, how aroused they were. And so the heterosexual men were like very aroused for the heterosexual porn, not aroused for the gay porn, and the blood readings came back the same. With women, it got much more interesting. First of all, it didn't matter if they were straight or lesbian. The results were pretty similar. Women were aroused with anything that involved sex. They got aroused for this hetero porn, they got aroused for the gay porn, they got aroused for the lesbian porn, they even got aroused for the monkey porn, some of them. And the most interesting part is when they had to self-report how aroused they were, their self-report did not match up to the blood readings. So they would say they weren't aroused by the gay porn, but they were. And so the researchers basically concluded, they're like, okay, not only are women seemingly aroused by everything, but they aren't aware of when they're aroused or not. And I think the researchers said something like, this study raises more questions than it answered, or something like that. And it's just female sexuality, like it's messy, it's confusing. But the prevailing theory that came out of that study and some others is that ultimately what arouses women is bold and unpredictable behavior. So, because one kind of contradiction in female arousal that always researchers never understood is that something like 30 or 40% of women have rape fantasies. But women also have marriage proposal fantasies. And they're like, that makes no sense. How do you bridge that contradiction? Well, the thing that bridges that contradiction is they're both demonstrations. They're both bold demonstrations. They're both demonstrations of vulnerability, and they're demonstrations of a male sexuality or a male being bold towards a woman. And so the prevailing theory at the moment is that boldness, unpredictable behavior, unpredictable sexual behavior is the key to female arousal. And my experience plays that out entirely. My experience is that basically you can have the most awkward conversation with a woman, you can have nothing in common, but if you're aggressive, and you're aggressive in a respectful way that she's comfortable with, she gets turned on more often than not. And sometimes she'll get turned on and she won't want to be turned on. She'll be like, stop, I'm horny, I don't want to do this. And these two, I mean, even on a neurological level, these two things are separate. They can occur at the same time, they can occur separately. And so, what's the missing ingredient? If you're always ending up in the friend zone, if you're always ending up in stale relationships where nothing's happening, it's because something's not escalating. You're not pushing things. You're not asserting your desires. you're not making yourself vulnerable, or your compatibility is run out. It's one or the other. I get a lot of emails from guys, and it's funny. It's almost reached the point where a lot of the emails I get are of a certain variety. Like I call them my date emails. And they always start with, so I went on this date. And then it's like 3 paragraphs, and I already know what's going to happen. All these emails, they always start with, I went on a date, I thought things went great, and you get to the end and it's like, she didn't call me back, or we didn't go on a date again. And they don't know why. And in their minds, it's always, we had a great date, and like I can read through the paragraphs, and it's always like, we had a great time, she's from this college, and I'm from this college, and we talked about this, and we had great conversation, and you know, we had this in common, and blah, blah, blah. And the whole time they're talking about this stuff. And then they're like, she didn't call me back. Or we didn't go on another date. And it's almost gotten to the point where I don't even have to read the email. As soon as I see it's about a date, I can reply, be like, when did you kiss her? And almost always the guy replies, he's like, oh, well, I haven't yet. Went on 3 dates, didn't kiss her. Well, what the fuck are you on dates for? If you wanted to have conversations, call up your mother. On the other hand, everybody knows who Tony Robbins is, right? Tony Robbins is like a self-help superhero. He had a seminar that I watched that it was about relationships, and he was talking. It was about like marriage relationships, long-term relationships. And I don't remember exactly the situation, but he brought up this old couple. I think they were part of the audience. And he brought up this old couple. They were like 75 years old or something like that. They'd been married for 45 years, something like just really old, been together for a long time. And Tony asked them, I mean, when they came up on stage, like their hands were all over each other, and you know, they were kissing, and his arm was around her. And Tony asked them, he said, do you guys still have sex? And the woman starts giggling, and she's like, oh yeah, all the time. And he said, but how is that? How old are you guys? In your 70s. She starts giggling. She's like, oh yeah, it's been 48 years, and we still get between the sheets. She said, every day if I can get him to. And he's like, yeah, not quite every day anymore. But he said, I'm not as young as I used to be. So anyway, this went on because, you know, Tony basically had a seminar room full of like 500 married couples who never had sex anymore. And here's this like 75, 80-year-old couple that is still having sex all the time. And so he asked him, he said, what's your secret? How did you maintain this? How do you keep doing this? And the woman said, we have 2 rules. And the 2 rules are, A, anything one person wants to try, the other person has to try it. And B, we have to try everything once. And they start giggling, and like, of course, you know, I'm sitting there gagging because I'm imagining all of the horrible things that this little old lady's doing. And but I thought that was interesting because basically what she was saying is the solution was to never stop with this. So always have an open mind to keep trying something new once. To keep trying to do something the other person wanted to do. And so I thank God Tony didn't ask them specifically what they were doing, but like, but that was their secret to maintaining a healthy sex life decades and decades later. So it's a good quote to remember. It's not escalating, it's dying. If things are not moving forward, they're ending.